Welcome back to the Start to Finish course on upgrading to .NET Core. We are currently in the module focused on refactoring our application to use some of the new features from .NET Core that we've just added. In this lesson, we're going to be replacing our app.config files with the appsettings.json files. Let's go back to our project. Let's close out of all the things that are open. And let's look at the projects and where we're pulling data from. So we have let's start with the MVC project. We have both the app.config and the appsettings.json. Now our appsettings.json, we don't have any information in here. At least not anything we're actually using. In fact, we can get rid of this logging section here because we're using the Serolog instead of the built-in logging. We'll leave the allowed host to all. But over here, we've got a number of settings that we're pulling from that we need to pull from in a different way. If we look at the tournament tracker, the tracker UI, which is the WinForm project, we do have an appsettings.json. We added that. We don't have anything we're pulling from. We do have the app config. And the same thing is true for our WPF project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition over just one of our projects, not all of them. And the reason why is because, again, we have to have dependency injection in place in order for this to work. Now, I don't know if we're using any of these settings in the actual UI or if they're all in a library. I know most are in a library, but let's look at this greater wins. I hit Control F here. And I'm going to search the current project. You hit next, and next again, and no more instances have been found. I believe everything else is in the class library. So it looks like everything is in the class library that uses these settings. That's going to be a bit of an issue because of the fact we haven't added dependency injection into this class library, and because not everything in here is an instantiated class. So for example, the email logic is going to do an app key lookup on the sender email, which that's right here. So the email logic is pulling from, let's hit save there. The email logic is pulling from the app.config file, but it's a static class, not instantiated. Therefore, we can't just add dependency injection into it. This is where decisions get hard, because I could change this email logic to be a instantiated class, even if we make it a singleton. But I don't think we'd make it a singleton because it doesn't store data. And the reason why we made it static is because it's just doing stuff. It's not storing data long term. But now I can't use dependency injection with it. However, there's only 2 references here. So I could say, well, let's just change it over and change those 2 references. But those 2 references are in the tournament logic, which the tournament logic is also a static class. Well, now I have to change this to be an instantiated class. The problem with that is that this has 9 references. So now I have to go through these references and make sure that we have dependency injection working for all of them. So you can see how this makes it a little more difficult. But what I would encourage you to do is go down this rabbit hole when you're going down after you've done the dependency injection. Because once you've done dependency injection all throughout, then it's going to be very easy to replace these sections that pull from the config file. It's going to be very easy to replace that with a config lookup from dependency injection. Until that point, though, I do want down here, actually, I'm not sure it's even in here. I do know it's in SQL Connector because SQL Connector has a lookup for the connection string, and that comes right from the global config. So the global config is kind of hiding all of this lookup. So whenever you see app key lookup, there's 11 references, that is looking up in the config. Connection string, that's looking up in the config. So between those two, we can at least do some work. So let's start by looking at this connection string here and saying, hey, can we do this better? Well, yes, we can. Because we can say CTOR, and I want a couple of things in here. First, I want an iLogger. I want this to be of type SQL Connector. Log, control dot to add my private read-only iLogger. And then I also want an iConfiguration. And this is going to be my how I get the config information. So now, instead of doing this global config CNN string lookup here, what I'm going to do is replace this with config.getConnectionString. I need to pass it in a connection string name. Now, right now, the global config, let's look at that real quick. The global config takes in a connection string name, so I must have overwritten it. Oops. So let's Control Z out of here real quick. It's DB. So object, there we go. And so as object, I'm going to have properties, and one of them is going to be called tournaments. I'm going to have some type of connection string value inside that. What is that connection string value? Well, let's look at our app.config. It's this right here. So we paste that in. There we go. There's our connection string. So now we can read from the connection strings. Now, note that I'm asking for a get connection string, which is actually an extension method. So it's shorthand for get section, connection strings, and inside there, get the property and the name of the property. So this is just a helper method, essentially. If I wanted to do this the manual way, I would ask for the section, get a section, this is the section name, and then inside there can ask for properties. So that's what that was doing. But this is a shortcut for connection strings specifically. Okay, now I can come through here, I can grab this value and make sure that anywhere else that we're asking for that connection string, I now replace it with the correct connection string. Let's just prove this is true. Let's, the very first thing we do is we look for the tournaments. So the load tournaments, we have save tournaments. I should just do it this way. All right, we have save tournaments, we have create tournaments, get all tournaments, or get tournaments all. I am going to do a string CNN equals, and that same connection string, then I'll put a breakpoint right here. And now I'm going to go over to my WinForm project, which does have dependency injection fully enabled. And without changing anything else, I'm going to make sure it's set as startup. It is. But it appears that it hit the breakpoint. Yep, there we go. So for some reason it didn't scroll the right spot. But I'm on a breakpoint, and look at connection. It has pulled the correct connection string. Now you may say, yes, but did that pull that from app config, or did it pull it from your app settings.json? Great question, I'm glad you asked. Let's change this to be, this is Tim instead. Breakpoint's still there. And now the value is, this is Tim. So it is working, it is pulling from app settings.json. So we can undo that and make sure it's the right connection string, which actually is not the right connection string, because the right connection string is a local DB connection string. I moved my database was. But it is pulling from this file now. Okay, so we can remove the demo code we don't need. And we can take our breakpoint off. So this now works appropriately and it's loading from the app settings.json. Now what we need to do is replace all the rest of the dependencies on app.config, and then we can swap over to using app settings.json all the time. So let's move over the rest of our settings into app settings.json from our app.config file in WinForms. We can't quite get rid of this yet because we have not added dependency injection throughout and redone all the logic here to not be static classes. But we can at least move these settings over. So I'm going to grab all of these settings here. I'm going to copy them. Because the only thing we really read from here are these settings and the connection strings. So let's see how to move this over. I'm going to paste this in down below, and let's comment it out so that it doesn't throw any errors, but at least we can see it. Now, one idea would be to just create key value pairs just like all of these in our app settings. But I think since we're going in here and already moving over our structure, I think we should readdress how this is configured. Let's start with some easy ones. So let's start with SMTP. I think that should probably be a section called SMTP settings. And then inside there is our key value pairs for SMTP server. Put a comma afterwards. SMTP username. And then after that, SMTP password. If you put a colon before the double quotes, it actually puts it outside and moves you over. Watch again the next time I do this. So SMTP port. Now my cursor is still after the T before the double quotes. I hit colon. Oops, I hit control instead. Let's do this again. So I hit shift so I can hit colon. So colon, wow, then I hit the wrong key. Colon, there we go. Yeah, had a hard time typing since I'm now paying attention to it a little too much. Let's try this again. SMTP enable SSL colon, there you go. So enable SSL, the value is false. The port, the value is 25. The password is testing. The username is Tim. And the server is localhost. So now we can't just access these by saying, let's change this casing here. We can't just access these by asking So let's leave them separate. So let's tackle first this email. So email settings. Inside here we'll have sender email. Yes, I'm capitalizing that. And we'll have sender display name. We'll put a comma afterwards, and we'll copy in these values. And now we can get rid of these. Now let's create another section, and this one will be for SMS settings. So SMS settings. And again, we're going to correct the casing here. So SMS account SID. SMS auth token. And SMS from phone number. I'll put a comma at the end. The account SID is nice try. The auth token is nope. And the phone number is 5551212. Seems like maybe I wasn't going to give you my personal settings. Get rid of this. And now we have just these two left. And I could create a settings for file path, but I think what I'm going to do instead is have a setting called general settings. And inside there I'll have file path and greater wins. Make sure I put my comma at the end. And now I'll put the value of 1 in here. And my file path is this. So I can get rid of these. Now this is my appsettings.json file. It's fully complete and it's organized. It's not just a jumble of key value pairs. It's organized by section so that it makes sense for me. And hopefully if it makes sense for me, it will make sense for the next user as well. Now, because we don't have these files being, they're not instantiatable, we can't just start using these. And I've debated just saying, well, you do it on your own. I'll just show you how to do it because I do want to have you practice this stuff. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to at least look to see if maybe I can extract one of these and make it a copy of it and then make it an instance-based thing. So let's look at tournament logic. Tournament logic is called in a lot of different places, I believe. So it's called from the SQL connector, it's called from the text connector, it's called from the front end as well of multiple different areas. So let's do this. Let's create a copy of this. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to copy all the logic inside of it. So let's copy everything except for what layer is this. I don't want to copy the curly brace on this line. So I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. Wait for it, wait for it. Okay, so a little too far. I don't want to copy it on this line, therefore this is what I need to copy. Okay, so now I've got just the logic inside tournament logic. I'm going to add a new class. And this is tournament logic as well. And we don't want to get too confusing on this, so let's just call it new tournament logic. And this is what you do if you have a problem where you can't just replace everything. I'm going to replace just this, and now I do need to bring over my using round is a problem. We'll get to that. Let's scroll down here and calculate prize payout. My guess is that it's the, calculate prize payout is an extension method. That's a problem because we're not actually using that inside of a static class. Okay, so extension methods have to be inside of a static class. So we can't use this. Let's get rid of it. And then we have, so calculate prize payout's not there. We also need to find, let's just find in this file. So the current document, we're going to look for this. Values right here. Let's collapse everything down to definition. Let's do that first. So outlining, collapse to definition, and we're going to find one of these that we just deleted. So calculate prize payout. That just does a conversion, so no big deal. It's not using any of our config information. So let's go ahead and make this public. Ideal? Probably not. The other alternative is we can make it internal. And that would probably work as well. Internal means it will work inside of this class, but not outside. That's probably good. Now let's look for check current round and see what it does. It calls the complete tournament, which might be an issue. So complete tournament, let's look at this real quick. Complete tournament is going to do some work. Is that a problem? Well, it's calculating prize payouts. I'm going to assume that this is okay for now, but if it's not, I'll find out in a minute. So I'll make this internal as well. And then we probably have, oops, not this one. It's this one. It was, let me go back here. It was private. Okay. Just making sure I didn't make it public something into private something. So let's make this internal as well. And then let's look for that last one, alert users to new rounds. This one will probably be a problem because it calls alert person a new round, which this, I bet, is going to, it does. This one is going to create the email and then do email logic and send to. So I'm not going to make this one internal. Instead, I'm going to copy and bring it back into my project. Oops, not that. Yes, that's that. Okay. Alert users to new round. Got confused for a minute. So I'm going to bring this back in, and I'm going to make it not a static, and we're going to have to pass in the tournament model. But that raises a So what does complete tournament do? Well, complete tournament in here is probably going to, okay, it's going to calculate prize layout, prize payouts, and then, oh, it's going to email people. So we've gone on this rabbit hole and figured out we can't just make some of these internal. So I'm going to not save this. I'm going to not save this. And instead, we're going to go back to tournament logic again. Oh, and the whole thing's gone. Excellent. So I'm going to start over from scratch. Let's make this, make life simpler. Copy this whole thing. And in fact, I'm going to copy this whole thing, the entire thing, and paste it here, but make sure that up at the top, I make this new, oops, no space, new tournament logic, and take the static off. Okay, so we're starting back over from scratch because the original idea was that we would just take away any of the extension methods, and that we would then point to the original tournament logic for those extension methods. That won't work. So instead, let's make these not extension methods. So get rid of this. Get rid of this. In fact, get rid of static everywhere. An extension method is just a shortcut. We pass in the object, the tournament model in this case. So we can still pass in that object. It's just that it's going to look a little different when we call it. That's all it is. So get rid of all of our statics. And anywhere we see this, we're going to get rid of it as well. Okay, so now we should have some errors. Let's save this. Let's go to our errors. Let's expand back out and check current round. Where it says model.checkCurrentRound, we're going to say check current round of the model. Now we're good to go. Again, check current round, pass in the model instead of saying model dot. Getting repetitive, isn't it? We could do a replace, but be very careful to replace only in new tournament logic, not in the original. Okay, next error is down here somewhere. Let's go to our error list. Just double click and find it. Okay, so first place prize is going to get passed in here. And then we do this. So the prize itself, the item that it's that dot, the name, that goes in first. So in this case, second place prize goes in first. And now it should be that we're good to go. Our error list is blank. Awesome. So now this we can use and we can instantiate it. All right, so we can get rid of this here. That's just notes. I do want to create a constructor. I want to pass in a iLogger. Of type new tournament logic. Do our control dot and add the private field. And then after this, let's look through here and see what else we need to pass in. Probably the config. Let's get that right now. Configuration. And now let's read through here and see where we need to get configuration information. We can also put logging in here now as well. So global config connection. So that's that connection string. I'm sorry, it's the connection to the database or the text file. We could replace that with a lookup to the actual iData connection object instead. But for now, I'll leave it. Okay, let's scroll down here and probably email logic. So we have the to, the subject, the body. So that's going to pass into this email logic class, which we could leave as it is right now, or we can replace it. Same with SMS logic. So I think what we'll do is we'll replace the email logic at least. But before we do, let's look at global config in this current document and see where else. Let's just Control A and copy everything because this also is a static class, and we're going to add a class. We're going to say it's new email logic, and we're going to paste everything in and make sure you put the new back in front. Now the other option here is instead of saying new for everything, we could create a folder. And then that's a different namespace. We could call that namespace new or instantiations or DI or anything you want really. And then put the same exact names of everything in that folder, but with a new namespace. That's another possibility. It can step on toes if you're not careful with using statements, but otherwise it's possible. So you don't have to do this new. The nice thing is with refactoring is after we get rid of entirely tournament logic and email logic and have just the new ones, I could do this. I can do control dot and say rename. Oops, I can rename it first and then do a control dot and rename it everywhere. And then that way, with one change, it's going to rename it everywhere in my solution and we're good to go. So now I have new email logic. Let's go to my tournament logic. Not this one, new tournament logic. And at the very top, I'm going to ask for either email logic or iEmail logic. I think that to be complete, I really want to have an interface here. So I've got to get rid of the statics first. which is only a couple of them. And now I can save that and do control dot and extract an interface called iEmailLogic. And now, right here, I can ask for iEmailLogic, control dot. And it says, oh, you spelled it wrong, it looks like. Change iEmailLogic to email-logic. No, that's not what I want to do. Why did it not create my interface? Ah, it's iNewEmailLogic. It did create my interface. It's just that I didn't type it right. So just say email. Let's just say email. Then control dot to add our field. And then let's do a control F in here for email, which, yes, it's going to find its first ones, but then email logic. Instead of doing that, I'm going to say underscore email. Let's see if there's anywhere else that we have it. Email logic. We should actually search for this probably. So underscore email. And that's it. So now we've replaced email logic with new email logic, which is going to get inserted using dependency injection. So now let's close out of everything else. And let's open back up new email logic. And here we need to have a constructor for a logger and for the configuration. iLogger. And this is new email logic. And then we also need an iConfiguration. Add that private field as well. And now down here, where we have equals new mail message, we could add that as well. But at this point, I'm not going to do it yet. But I am going to replace all of these. So let's actually put on new lines here so you can see them more easily. So there is a request for sender email. So config.get section, or I could do get value. I'm going to do a get value and show you that. It's a type string. Now remember that this is the sender. Remember that in our config section, let's open that up. It's actually under sender email right there. So it's under email settings. So it's email settings, but then inside there, it is sender email. So I'm going to look this one up based upon going directly to it. I'm going to say colon sender email. So email sections, inside there, I want you to look for sender email, and that will get this value. But for this one, I'm going to do it a little bit different. And instead of getting sender display name that way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oops, one too many close parens, config.get section, and the section name is email settings. And then from there, whoops, and then from there, get value, it's a string value, and the value is going to be, and that's the value is sender display name. Okay, so either one works. Now, you maybe look at this and saying, I know which one I prefer, and so do I. This works, but it's verbose. Get section, get value. Whereas this one dives straight to that specific value. Now, the get section does allow you to save this whole section into its own variable that then you can pull just get values off of that section. So that is a possibility to make your life a little easier at some point. But in general, I use this method. The nice thing is if you're burying sections multiple deep, just put a semicolon. I'm sorry, a full colon. So put a colon for each section, and then at the end, the name of the value or the property. All right, so here we're looking for SMTP server. So SMTP server, but that's not in email settings. That's actually in the SMTP settings. And so we'll copy this, and this is the SMTP port. Just make sure you get these strings right, because there is no IntelliSense here. And this is the SMTP username. And this is the SMTP password. And finally, the enable SSL. Okay, so now our email settings have all been changed to use the new app settings lookup. So now what we can do is we can add new tournament logic and new email logic into our dependency injection system. That's step one. So down here we can say services.add transient for new email logic. And we need one for new tournament logic as well. Let's create an interface for that. There we go. And that allows us to say services.add transient for new tournament logic, like so. With all that being done, now whenever we ask for tournament logic in our WinForm project, we can replace it with new tournament logic. So let's go to actually we're already in this project. Let's close out the other ones. So we're in this project already, so I can search for tournament logic inside of this project. So instead of current document, current project. Search for tournament logic, finds these two, and now I have this right here. So I am going to come up to the top and ask for an new tournament logic. Let's do it on a new line. Let's call it tournament logic is fine. And we'll create that field. And now where we found that, let's scroll back down. We can say tournament logic.create rounds. Okay, so next it's going to find all the ones that it has added. Here we go again, tournament viewer form. So let's come to the top of the tournament viewer form and ask for an new tournament logic. Tournament logic, control dot, and let's make this case sensitive. And now we'll come down to the bottom here where we found it and say tournament logic. We'll do our next. It finds the few we already created and no more. So now our WinForm application is using the new tournament logic. And that's regardless of SQL versus text file. So let's start this. Wait for it to start. It's going to probably throw an exception, it looks like. So we'll find out where that is. Once we get the Stack Overflow exception, we're going to track it down. Waiting for it still. All right, so it actually stopped the application. And if we look here, we've got a major problem that crashed the application. Kind of nice we can see that now. And it says a network-related or instance-specific error occurred while establishing a connection to the SQL Server. The server was not found or not accessible. Well, okay, yeah, I kind of knew that. Let's see, first of all, I believe we can just change this to text connector. As long as we have the correct dependency injection, we'll find out. But it's that connection string. I just need to change that to be the right connection string, and it will work. All right, so it did work. It did load the tournaments, and now we can go to a tournament. Let's create a new one. Create a tournament. Create one real quick here. This is the config test, no entry fee. We're going to add Tim, Bob, Mary, and the Hobbits. And it's like a band. Create the tournament. And I just got an email. I got a couple of emails from the from a system saying, hey, you have new matchups. So that means our email system now works, and this is up and running. But our email system just pulled from our app-settings.config file or .json file. It didn't pull from app.config. So it works. So that's the pattern to undertake. Let's just close this down. We don't need to have it open. Is that what we need to do is, if we can't replace everything, we need to just create new versions and use those where we can, and then slowly switch over until the old versions don't have anything there. Then we delete the old versions, we rename the new versions, refactor it everywhere, and it's like we never had the new versions. It's just the things that were named the old name now have the new logic. So that's how you have to kind of take it piece by piece and implement this to get it to work. So for your other projects, which I'm going to allow you to do, and even for modifying the rest of the WinForm project, modifying the rest of the WinForm project, follow the same pattern. Have a new SMS logic, and that might be it. Eventually get away from global config. And I think that's it. So otherwise, you have just data access, which is already using dependency injection. So with all that done, then move on to making sure the calls everywhere in the WinForm project are calling the new versions, and then close that out, move on to the WPF project and the MVC project, and follow that same pattern. Once it's all done, once you have dependency injection everywhere, once you have logging everywhere, and the old files are no longer needed, delete them, refactor everything. Or at least rename it. Okay? For your other projects, you really can just do this. You have app-settings.json, just copy this, and then go to your other projects, and go to your app settings, and paste it in. The one tricky one is not tricky, but more tricky one is the tracker MVC. Just don't overwrite this. So put a comma and then paste it in. That's the big change. Okay? And then you'll have all your settings in your new app-settings.json. Now you may ask about the app-settings.development.json files. So wherever we have development, let's open up our WinForm project. This will replace any value that's in here if it has a matching value in here. So let's just say connection strings. I'm going to put connection strings over in development, and I'm going to replace this with Tim was here. Okay? Now, in theory, what's going to happen is that whenever you run this in development, it's going to use this value instead of this value. That way, you could put let's close all the rest of these down. Man, got so many. That way, you could put something more specific to you here. Not sensitive, but more specific to you. And the only time it'd overwrite anything is if it was running in development on your machine. Because you wouldn't push the appsettings.development.json up to your source control server probably. Now, I say in theory we'll do that because right now it won't. And let's prove that by going back to our first of all program and changing this back to use the SQL connector. And then let's go to our library and go to our data access, our SQL connector, and we're going to do that same thing where we grab when the connection string is loaded. So let's find our get tournaments all, and let's do our string cnn equals underscore config dot get connection string for DB, just like we have it right there. And I got to put a breakpoint right here. Now, the connection string that I just created in the development says Tim was here. Let's run this in the WinForm project and see what that breakpoint tells us when we get there. And it puts us in the wrong spot. It's a little above. Okay, the connection string is server equals dot, database equals tournament. That's not what the development thing said. So why is that? Well, I'll show you why. If we right-click on an MVC project, let's collapse these down, we go to Properties, and we go to Debug. We see this ASP.NET Core underscore environment, and the value is development. This is for environmental variables. But if we go to our WinForm project and go to Properties and go to Debug, there's no environmental variable here. And that's the difference. So we need to put a value here that says this is a development environment. But it's not going to be the ASP.NET Core underscore environment. It is, all caps, .NET underscore environment. And the value is development. Okay, you have three options: development, staging, and production. Those are the three recognized names. Now, if you don't specify, then production is assumed. That's why it wasn't reading the appsettings.development.json. If you wanted to create a staging version, you could do that. And then you could say staging here. Now, this only makes sense right now for if you're running it inside of Visual Studio. But you're not going to be running it everywhere in Visual Studio. So like I said, default is going to be production. That's cool, but how do you even use staging? Because staging is usually not on your machine. Well, what you do is set up on the machine itself. As in Windows, you'd set up an environmental variable called .NET underscore environment and set it to staging. And now that's what it will read. It will read that appsettings.json file. So appsettings.staging.json file to override the app settings file. Okay, so you set up development. I'm going to save this and I'll close this down as well. Let's run this again. I haven't changed anything else. And now the connection says Tim was here. So it's overwritten the value with the value from the appsettings.development.json file. So that's how you use those files. I'm not going to use them. There's not really a need to use them in this situation, but that's something personally that can be pretty helpful. Okay, so let's undo the rest of this. Let's go back to the text connector. And now let's get rid of this setting here. There's not a reason to have it. I don't want to leave you with information that's not necessary. Let's close all documents. Okay, so now we have implemented the appsettings.json and it's shown how to use that in different scenarios and even how to override it with the appsettings.development.json. And that wraps up this section on refactoring. Now we're going to look at how we're going to make some changes in publishing. So we're not going to do everything for publishing, but we're going to do some of the show off how does this change things when I go to publish any of these projects. So that's in the next section.